Hey, welcome friends. Today we'll have a Google Meet talk on the inner man, followed by a continuation of our review of the Bhagavad Gita from 12:05 to 1 p.m. The declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists. Well, Cyrus has got the talk, so I'll do it. We and the other lodges throughout the world, the ULTs, are united in making the pure teachings available for each person to check, test, and verify, make Theosophy a living power in our lives, and spread the original teachings as we found them, in uplifting ourselves while helping and teaching others. The declaration is our sole guide and has always been the same, which is: the policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work in hand is to have on hand, and the end that keeps in view are too absorbing and lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, the similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Our devotional reading comes from chapter 13, pages 95 to 97 of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is speaking. I will now tell thee what is the object of wisdom, from knowing which a man enjoys immortality. It is that which it has no beginning, even the supreme Brahma, of which it cannot be said that it is either being or non-being. It has hands and feet in all directions, eyes, heads, mouths, and ears in every direction. It is immanent in the world, possessing the vast whole. Itself without organs, it is reflected by all the senses and faculties, unattached yet supporting all, without qualities yet the witness of them all. It is within and without all creatures, animate and inanimate. It is inconceivable because of its subtlety. And although near, it is far away, far off. Although undivided, it appears as divided among creatures. And while it sustains existing things, it also is known to be known as the destroyer and the creator. It is the light of all lights, and it is declared to be beyond all darkness. And it is wisdom itself, the object of wisdom, and that which is to be obtained by wisdom. In the hearts of all it ever presided. Thus hath been briefly declared what is the perishable body, and wisdom itself, together with the object of wisdom, He, my devotee, who thus in truth conceiveth me, obtaineth my state. Know the prakrita or nature and purusha, the spirit, are without beginning, and know that the passions and the free qualities are sprung from nature. Nature, or prakriti, is said to be that which operates in producing cause and effect in actions. Individual spirit, or purusha, is said to be the cause of experiencing pain and pleasure. For spirit, when invested with matter, or prakriti, experiences the qualities which proceed from prakriti. Its connection with these qualities is the cause of its rebirth in good and evil wombs. The spirit and the body are called Maheswara, the great Lord. The spectator, the administrator, the sustainer, the enjoyer, and also the Paramatma, the highest soul. He who thus knoweth the spirit and nature, together with the qualities, whatever mode of life he may lead, he is not born again on this earth. Wow, powerful stuff. And we are all that. Okay. The fundamental propositions of theosophy.
Should I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. The secret doctrine establishes three fundamental propositions. The first fundamental statement of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in words of Mandukya, unthinkable and unspeakable. It is beingness rather than being, and is beyond all thought or speculation. It is the one reality symbolized by the term the great breadth. The second fundamental assertion or the secret doctrine is an absolute universality of the law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. An alternation such as that of day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking is fact so common, so perfectly universal and without exception, that it is easy to comprehend that in it we see one of the absolutely fundamental laws of the universe. The third fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine asserts identity of all souls with the universal oversoul. It describes the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycle of incarnation in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. In order for every divine soul to acquire an independent or conscious existence, it has to have A, pass through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara, and B, acquired individuality or consciousness first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts checked by its karma, thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, the Dhyani Buddha. The third fundamental proposition further asserts that esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychosis and reincarnations. So we'll now proceed to the talk, and let me just share. Slide, give me a second. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, friends, and welcome to the talk on the inner man. During this summer, we have heard excellent presentations on the impermanent and permanent aspects of man, and this is the final talk of this quarter, which will focus entirely on the inner man. Before elaborating further on this topic, this student wishes to clarify that for the purposes of this talk, the term inner man does not imply the astral body, but the higher self, the permanent aspect of each man. The topic of the inner man or the higher self or the inner self is very vast, and we will touch upon only a few aspects which are more applicable to the earnest student of theosophy. So we may start off with a few quotes referring to the inner man or the higher nature. The first is from the Dhammapada, which states, "The self is a lord of self. What higher lord could there be?" This brief or profound verse encapsulates an ancient fact of the divinity within us. Or as is said in the Bible, the kingdom of heaven is within you. In the Gita, Krishna instructs that the inner man is essentially the spirit in each, which is also referred to as the silent spectator or the still small voice that urges man to follow the higher path, provided man is willing to listen. In order to truly grasp these seemingly simple quotes, we should first strive to distinguish the lower and the higher aspects within us, or as was discussed in an earlier talk this summer, the difference between the impermanent and the permanent poles of each of us. In the Gita, Krishna offers us the opportunity to pursue devotion first through distinguishing between the impermanent lower self and the permanent and everlasting spirit or Atma or the higher self. The Gita further talks about two kinds of beings, one mortal and the other immortal. Here's what Krishna says. There are two kinds of beings in the world, the one divisible and the other indivisible. The divisible is all things and the creatures, the indivisible is called Kutastha, or he who standeth on high unaffected. But there is another spirit designated as Supreme Spirit, Paramatma, which permeates and sustains the three worlds. Mr. Crosbie teaches us that these are not two separate divisions of man, but coexist within each and every being. He teaches us that our higher nature is not divisible or temporary, rather it is a constant throughout our evolution, is eternal and truth itself. In contrast, our lower nature is impermanent and changing, and that it is the inner man who facilitates these changes in a constantly evolving being. It is at the prompting of our permanent inner self that we finally make a conscious decision to harmonize our thoughts, words, and deeds, the permanent higher part of us. In essence, we are like the prodigal son who has strayed from his father's house and dwelt among the swine, feeding upon husks. The son finally realized that the company of swine is not his true destiny, and finally says, "I will arise and return to my father." So he finally turns around, makes his long journey home, and finally assumes his true place in nature. We are all prodigal sons and daughters. The parable of the prodigal son is an allegorical teaching describing the evolutionary journey made by the ego. The husks of the swine represent the lower nature that is immersed in the terrestrial and carnal living until finally, upon repeated disappointments, he begins to question his deep materialistic living. And after immense suffering, he says, "I will arise," and commences his journey back home. He then strives to work for the emancipation of all beings from conditioned existence. Mr. Crosbie goes on to say that the whole of ancient wisdom is man's own birthright. This knowledge dwells in the inner part of his nature, is always with him, his physical instrument being the sole obstacle from recognizing this profound knowledge. The power to perceiving this higher knowledge is within everyone, but that perception belongs to the inner man. So how can we make this perception a living power in all our lives? Mr. Crosbie says, by acting from the basis of our eternal divine nature, by assuming our own identity, by ceasing to place dependence on any philosophy, on any science or religion, or any statement whatever, by depending on the reality of the inner, true, spiritual man, by clarifying our mental conceptions, by thinking right thoughts and by acting in accordance with them. By this approach, every channel in the body becomes open to what goes on. When, as spiritual beings, we leave the physical instrument at night and are active on the inner spiritual planes of being. Every one of us should strive to open up these channels, connecting with the higher nature. Mr. B.P. Wadia advises us to live the life of the soul instead of life of the body. The path cannot be trodden by any aspirant without his inner help, which we receive from our own consciousness. We can only learn ourselves. Masters can but point out the way. The teachings of the Buddha center around the relinquishing of outer and temporary things. The Buddha advises us that ceremonies and rituals are fetters of progress in the spiritual life. The first and necessary qualification is an unshakable belief in one's own powers and a deity within oneself. Otherwise, a man will simply develop into an irresponsible medium. We should refrain from making ourselves a storehouse of other people's ideas and inspirations. HBB taught that throughout the whole mystic literature of the ancient world, we detect the same idea of spiritual esotericism, that the personal God exists within, not nowhere outside the worshipper. HPB strongly attacked the idea of the personal God as put forward in the outer world, but she believed in the personal God within each worshipper. That deity is no vain breath or a fiction, but an immortal entity. Therein lies the strength of the entity, its immortality, an immortal entity, the initiator of initiates. We should ponder over this expression. We talk too lightly about initiation, and which do so are ignorant about it. This thought of HPB's needs meditating upon. There is something within us that is immortal, the personal God, the initiator of initiates. This is a radical idea and needs most careful thought. HPB deliberately tells her pupils who are getting ready for treading the path, the finding of the master, the coming towards initiation, that the initiator is within us. In Isis Unveiled, HPB writes, the Atma, the Self, the mighty Lord and Protector, once that man knew as I am or ego sum or ahami, showed his full power to him who could recognize the still small voice. From the days of the primitive man, described by the first Vedic poet, down to our modern age, there has not been a single philosopher worthy of that name who did not carry in the silent sanctuary of his heart a grand and mysterious truth. Therefore, we must accept the reminder and simply remark that even in the tortured and barbarous phraseology of the Codex Nazareus, we detect throughout the same idea. Like an undercurrent, rapid and clear, it runs without mixing its crystalline purity with the muddy, heavy waters of dogmatism. We find in the Codex, as well as in the Vedas, in the Avesta, as in the Adidharma and Kapila's Sankhya Sutras, not less in the fourth Gospel. We cannot attain the kingdom of heaven unless we unite ourselves. Unless we unite ourselves indivisibly with the Rex Lucis, and the Lord of splendor, and of light, our immortal God. We must first conquer the immortality and take the kingdom of heaven by violence offered to our material selves. We have to find the immortal being in us. He must initiate. He must bring us the light. This teaching of HBB is of vital value and important at the present moment. Without this principle, central cardinal fact that there is within us an immortal entity whose activities must be brought into expression, we cannot do anything in the spiritual life. We can only take the kingdom of heaven by violence when the immortal God within us has been brought into activity and expression. Therefore, we want to find him. In another writing, HPB says that he is the master of masters. There is no master higher than the immortal divine spark within us. HPB insists strongly on the unfoldment of the powers of the human self, of the higher self. Now, frankly, if we examine ourselves, many of us will find that we are too dependent on external things. These externals are very good, may be very valuable, still they're externals. Our tendency is to get into a mistaken groove and make it more and more defined, unless we recognize that all these truths are given to us to be applied in our own way, to our own individual cases, and that in the application of them, no power in heaven or earth can help us save ourselves. We will continue in our mistakes. Therefore, the reliance on inner consciousness, the inner self, is necessary. So how do we reach the inner self? We can take some clues from the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, fearlessness, sincerity, assiduity in devotion, generosity, self-restraint, piety and almsgivings, study, mortification and rectitude, harmlessness, veracity and freedom from anger, resignation, equanimity, and not speaking of the faults of others, universal compassion, modesty and mildness, patience, power, fortitude and purity, discretion, dignity, unrevengefulness, and freedom from conceit. These are the marks of him whose virtues are of a godlike character, or son of Bharata. One of the great virtues taught by Krishna in this verse is that of fearlessness, by which he instructs Arjuna to stand up and fight. Further, Krishna says in the Gita, true wisdom of a spiritual kind is freedom from self-esteem, hypocrisy, and injury to others. It is patience, sincerity, respect for spiritual instructors, purity, firmness, self-restraint, dispassion for objects of sense, freedom from pride, and a meditation upon birth, death, decay, sickness, and error. It is an exemption from self-identifying attachment for children, wife, and household, and a constant, unwavering steadiness of heart upon arrival of every event, whether favorable or unfavorable. It is the never-ceasing love for me alone, the self being effaced, and worship paid in a solitary spot, and a want of pleasure in congregations of men. It is a resolute continuance in the study of Adhyatma, the spirit, the Supreme Spirit, and a meditation upon the end of the acquaintance of acquirement knowledge of truth. That is called wisdom or spiritual knowledge. Its opposite is ignorance. The Isha Upanishad instructs us that the only permanent condition is to sacrifice egotism to the divine consciousness, to sacrifice lower self to the inner man, who is also the master. That is because at heart of the lower self, the self-centered consciousness, also referred to as a body of death, is egotism. Conquest of this egotism is necessary to find the way to the inner master. When we realize that the self is in all things, and that is through the virtue of the presence that all things exist and have the being. In practice, the aspirant should see the master in all beings. Further, we are taught that at the very heart of egotism lies fear. It is a lower self's fear that it will be deprived of its desires. Hence, fear and desires go hand in hand. Along similar lines, Sankaracharya said, recognizing as thine own the hidden self, the witness of the soul and its activities, perceiving truly that am I, destroy the thought of self in all not self. And he exhorts us to contemplate continuously on our inner self and further look upon ourselves as the impermanent self and remove all thoughts associated with the temporary lower self. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, Krishna points out that the duality of our natures by stating that the self is the friend of the self and also its enemy. This seems to indicate two selves, one the enemy as well as a friend of the other. So here we quickly discover that Krishna implies the higher and the lower natures of the individual. Krishna goes on to say that one must raise the self by the self, where in the lowest actor of the self that has been raised by the higher. So we cannot expect to raise ourselves to a higher state of mind without forsaking of or renunciation of worldly affairs. Mr. Judge reminds us that pursuing of one's duty comes into play. Duty has to be pursued such that one's mind and desires are not attached to the outcome of a particular action. It is with this practice that results in the commencement of meditation. We are taught by Mr. Judge that when one watches his thoughts and acts so as to perform only those acts that ought to be done, will acquire a concentration in time which will increase the power of real meditation. Since leading such a meditative life is very difficult, it is here where we seek the help of Krishna, our inner self, to raise our lower self. This practice gradually leads to self-mastery, which will, over time, prevent the lower self from dragging the pilgrim down. Mr. Judge goes on to say that the self at one end is close to the lower rungs of evolution's ladder, and the other side, it is nearest divinity. Performing one's duty also calls for equal-mindedness and intentness upon the Supreme Spirit, in pleasure and pain, victory and defeat, success and failure. Every effort made with the Supreme Spirit will be preserved in our inner nature, and no effort in this direction is ever lost. When equal-mindedness is practiced assiduously, the individual becomes so calm and free from delusion of mind and soul that he remains the same whether among enemies or friends, with the righteous or the sinners. What is the language of the soul? To answer this question, we must recognize that man is in fact the higher self, and that it is the self that is a perceiver, that is vision itself, and changeless. Mr. Crosbie says that the idea of the real man, who is in fact the inner self, and is constant in whatever condition he may be existing, whether asleep or awake, whether in a physical body during his lifetime, whether in another form of body after death or before birth, or before the existence of this planet or the solar system, that this real man was the same perceiver then as now, the same soul at all the time, the creator of all the conditions that have arisen, the intelligent creator of this universe in connection with all the beings below him and all beings above him. Man thus forms part of one great brotherhood, and this bond of brotherhood extends throughout the lowest being to the very highest. So taking this conception that the self is the same in each being, no matter how great that being may be, nor how low, we get another idea in regard to the soul. That soul also represents the acquired experience gained through evolution by each and every class of being. Each individual being is not only self, but in addition, the acquired experience gained throughout contact with all other beings. Realizing that there are individual souls, we can see that the only differences between souls are in the degrees of acquired experience. Taking the soul from this point of view, then as acquired experience of individuals, when we speak of God or the Oversoul, the universal Oversoul, we simply mean the acquired experiences or wisdom of every soul and all souls. That would be the meaning of the sentence in the Bhagavad Gita that the self is wisdom itself, the object of wisdom, that which is attained to be attained by wisdom, full consciousness of the union of all souls or spiritual identity. Mr. Crosbie goes on to state that theosophy endeavors to present to man what his real nature is, that he is first, last, and all the time a spirit. Spirit means life and consciousness, the power to see, to know, to experience. We all have that. That is common to all of us. It is not separate in self. It is one life in all beings of every grade. But we as individuals have evolved into individuals from a great ocean of life. We are individualized spirit, and so we each have a separate individual existence, which is continuous. In that sense, we are an evolution, but an evolution of spirit, not matter. The evolution of knowledge, not of form only. This has been obtained throughout observation and experience. Whatever differences exist are because of more or less experience or a better adaptation and application of it. There is no difference in the source or potentialities of any being. All this we find out if we move along the path shown. All men desire spiritual knowledge, yet the great bulk will not abate one jot or tittle or other mental and physical absorption in present and worldly things to obtain the spiritual knowledge they say they ardently long for. They'll have to move on through suffering and pain till they really desire to know the truth about themselves. If any man thinks he can get that knowledge by merely desiring or to possess it, or by desiring to possess it for himself alone, he is not in a position that will permit him of knowing this. The language of the soul can be acquired only when the being realizes that his duty is not to himself, but to the highest interests of his fellow men, not to save his own soul, but to lead as many of his neighbors as he possibly can, the direction of truth, desiring nothing for himself. So we will conclude this talk with some final words from Mr. B.P. Wadia. In our meditation, therefore, in our study, in our daily life, our effort should be to find and express the inner self within us, and not to rely too much on outside things. Let us find our own path, not walls in the wake of others. The child, when he grows up, finds his way, his own work, his own colleagues, his own philosophy. We are too apt to rely on leaders, and instead of taking up some of the burden, we put the masters on our own weight. And sometimes the masters have to push us off. The great karma of the world is on the shoulders of the masters. We should relieve them of some of it, not to put on them additional burdens. We should prepare to face our own karma. The first necessity, as HPB puts it, is to find an inner entity, that immortal ruler, the initiator of initiates. This work is to be accomplished in definite stages. First, a clear conception of the thing to be done, then application of the doctrine of the inner ruler continuously, not only in meditation and study, but also in daily life. In matters of judgment, by act of what comes to us from within. It does not matter if we make mistakes. We have all had tumbles in the past, and we can always pick ourselves up and move on. If we are wise and we learn by the mistakes of other people, by example, that is the way we can make progress. We have so much personality that we fail to see the big truths. Therefore, we must follow the inner voice of conscience, even if it is not all wise. It is our conscience. It is the best we have, so to follow it is the best method to choose in the spiritual life. Our task is to find our immortal ruler, ourself, and then go forth into the world, bringing it to the kingdom of heaven. And with that, we'll conclude this short talk and open up the floor for any questions or contributions. Thank you.
I
I
have
have a comment, if I may. What I gather from the presentation is that the aspiration to reach the inner man, the inner soul, has to be selfless, not for your individual benefit, but in order to be of better service to humanity. That's what I gather from the talk, and also the 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 ways that struck to me, that the ways to reach the inner man is through action, not just to be to have the will to get to the inner man. It's through action, like correct conduct. Mainly, it resumed everything that you mentioned. It was a list, but perhaps we can resume it in the correct conduct. Those are my two comments.
Yeah, thank you. That's pretty much a good summary, because the whole objective, and starting even the voice of silence, whole objective of acquiring union with the higher self is for the service of others. To as we said, as Mr. B.P. Wadi said, to bring as many people as you can while you're learning. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So many questions went into my head in the talk, and now I can't remember all of them. But the major part I see is we only see what's the material world. That, the spiritual world we cannot see. We have to feel it. Would that be a fair characterization? We have to experience it that way. But if we realize that we are only seeing this world, when we come down from Diana Chohan, the level we were before in the spiritual world, and then we take in all the experiences that we have to progress in the spiritual world. The earth and the birds and the breeze, and then we could become man, and then we have to progress through our own self-induced and self-devised effort, which is to be be impersonal, stay with the spiritual side of it. But we don't do that because we don't see that. We go out in the street, we see the pavement on the ground, and we see the person, whoever it is, the personality we're talking to. It's very much easier to deal with that stuff than all these unknowns that you have to so we have to get over that. We have to get over that and deal with realize that all this stuff that was read in the beginning. It's unbelievable to think that I'm all that. So
Exactly.
I got to realize that I'm that.
Mhm.
And I've come down from the Diana Johans or so. They have to get this world experience to progress further. That's what I understand. So they're all trying to get down to our level to go through this so that they can continue on. And it's this an endless process. So this is just a process that we're going through now to learn our lessons. And if we kind of see that somehow, that helps a lot, I think. And what you put out and also the reading from the Gita really points in that direction. But it's hard to keep all that. It's in our head while we're out there doing whatever we do, doing this in this world.
Yeah, I think some HPB had mentioned that personality is so overpowering that unless we are conscious about, of the fact that we are souls with a body, right? We are inner selves, the self of all, which is same in everyone. Unless we consciously keep that in mind and perform our duties in an impersonal manner, it's very difficult to really be able to follow the inner life. And in many ways, that is life meditation, right? Really focus, be acutely aware that we are all permanent souls with a physical instrument that's needed to complete the journey of evolution, and that we are not just our bodies or our personalities. And I think that's really important to kind of keep that in mind as we encounter people of different natures, different predispositions. We have, as Krishna says in the Gita, to be equal-minded towards the enemy as well as a friend. And to do that, you have to recognize that behind the veil of the friend or enemy is the immortal inner self, which is same as us. In many ways, that is a concept of universal brotherhood too, right? So,
Why is it like that? Because we've forgotten who we were when we come into this material existence. We have to relearn that thing.
yes.
We relearn every time. And then it says if you know all this, you don't come back to this earth. I think is it suggesting us? Is it suggesting that the Buddha, he came back knowingly to help, and he was back here in body, but not in spirit. Well, in spirit too, but he already knew all this stuff. He's there to help us. So that's the path that we can choose to take too, if we want to do that.
Yes.
Or we can just go and do whatever we do in the spiritual world when we have learned our lessons here.
Yeah. I think so. What you're referring to is like a Buddha, the master who has, through a long series of incarnations, but leading the higher life, has broken free from the cycle of reincarnations. So he doesn't need to automatically reincarnate like we have to do, but he willfully stays back so he can help all others through this whole cycle of incarnations.
But the Buddha can remember what he was before.
Yes.
And we can't.
Yeah. In fact, in Krishna says that, right? He can remember his previous lives, but Arjuna cannot. We're not there yet. So.
Well, it would be awfully nice if we could do that.
Yeah.
Like we could make a lot more progress to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So
I once made a comment about remembering past lives, and I remember one student said, at this stage, it's better not to remember, because how could we live with ourselves with all our past mistakes? So it's like a cord. We don't know
Yeah.
what we have to work with, what we
Exactly.
have now.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we are not prepared to remember our past lives yet. No.
So if I was a henchman of something in a past life, I wouldn't remember that.
Yeah. So just so Caroline, you made a comment that we can acquire knowledge of inner self through action, right, and practice, and that's it reminds me of a phrase in the Voice of the Silence, which says, "Self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child." So without performing selfless deeds, whatever chance we have of knowing our inner self are pretty much diminished. It just stays a book knowledge. I mean, as HB said, you can read all the books you want to, but unless you practice, you'll never really know yourself.
That's correct. Thank you for your clarification, Cyrus.
Sure. Yeah. Hope you got a question.
Yeah. But that is not going to automatically happen either.
No.
Because you've got to learn to try to be selfless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many of us would say that we're selfless? I don't think that many people would recognize that.
No.
You have to develop into that.
Yes.
Over a long period of time.
Exactly.
Of trying.
Also check by karma too, right? So.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So we don't remember all this when we've come here, and it takes a long time to get that together when we're here, because it's a lot easier to look at someone else and consider them a personality. That's what you're seeing, but you're not seeing all this thing in themselves or you, unless you try.
Exactly. Yeah, and both in the Voice and Gita it says, right, you have to try, and you'll fail, but you have to get up and keep trying. I mean, that's and I think somewhere Mr. B.B. Vaidya says that greater than destiny is exertion. So we may seem that we are destined to, just a humdrum life on earth, but unless we exert ourselves to overcome, our lower tendencies, we will not succeed. So, and that's a work of many lives.
We've had talks on try.
Yes.
That's it.
Exactly. So here's a paragraph that from HPB's writing on spiritual progress, and she says, the main cause of pain lies in our perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent, and not only seeking but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable in a world of which the certain quality we can predicate is constant change, and always, just as we fancy we have taken up a firm hold upon the permanent, it changes within our very grasp, and pain results. And she's right about that. Most people seek the permanent and impermanent, and that's big source of the pain. So.
Yeah, that's kind of like what reminds me of the idea that you're not supposed to find your guru in this material world.
Mhm.
But I think that's what it says. It's,
Yeah.
in other words, is you have to connect with your guru
Mhm.
through yourself, really.
Yes, exactly.
Not through external means.
So here's another paragraph from HPB's writing. She says, the goal of the aspirant for spiritual wisdom is entrance upon a higher plane of existence. He is to become a new man, more perfect in every way than he is at present. So that's really, to become a new individual in a sense, to slowly, try and strive to give our mind attention away from the terrestrial aspects of evolution.
So that's also the other reason why we have difficulty too, is because this it takes many lifetimes to arrive at this point where we have learned as much as we need to learn from this material existence.
Yes.
It should take thousands of years to do that, an individual, but it could take a long time. So first is we don't know where we came from, because it's nothing material that you can put your hands on. But you got to overcome that by realizing that you are more than you think you are. With the way the Gita put it, it's hard to believe that I'm all that.
Yes. And I think the whole journey of the pilgrims encapsulated in the parable of the prodigal son, right? Who finally realizes that I will arise and return to my father. So it is we have strayed through many lives of a very materialistic living. We have kind of strayed away from our true source, and now we are on our way back, a long journey back to what we were in the beginning.
We've had a packed hour here.
Yeah.
I probably remember some of the things that I just went out of my head when we're done. But what else? Do we have other comments? If not, we can take a 5 minutes here rather than from 12 o'clock. If you want to do that, and we can start back with the Gita at noon.
Sounds good.
Did that give you enough time to do what you need to do?
Yes, it does. Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. See you soon.
Okay. All right.